Hi, Dom.
Hey, Taki, how are you?
Uh, Great. Thanks so much for coming. We're at the Meet.Capital Startup Podcast with Dom Einhorn, founder of Intelligent Games, but also of so many other companies and startups in the past. I think you've sold your first company 30 years ago.
28 years ago, yeah, 1996, yeah.
Yeah, and since then you've uh, done so much, invested in a lot of companies, um, and had many adventures. We've known each other for a few years now, and I'm so happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't think we've spoken since COVID, or it was right at the tail end of the COVID last time we had a conversation.
Yeah,
Aside from a few sentences here and there on LinkedIn every once in a while.
right, right. So it's good to catch up. Maybe could you give us a bit of a background on yourself beyond what I said?
Sure. Grew up in France, where I'm at right now, actually. But I spent the bulk of my career in the U.S. on the West Coast in Los Angeles, not in Silicon Valley, even though I was in the technology sector very early on in the early to mid 90s, primarily. Started as a digital marketing consultant in 1993, 1994. Built and sold an art auction in 1996. Continued in the same space, in the digital marketing space, and was acquired by a public company in 2001. Had a number of lives, number of missteps along the way, like most successful people that fail so many times that there's no other choice but to succeed at the end of the day. Uh, that's one of the first objectives, because I have a lot of startuppers still listen to you. Failure is a necessary stepping stone to success. And I'm sure they've heard that many times before, but the idea is to fail as quickly as possible because it's a lot cheaper if you fail quickly. And I think today you have all the tools and metrics necessary to measure your missteps and to make them a lot less painful than they used to be. What I mean by that is that I recently went through an old box of mine in my storage place, and I came across a bandwidth invoice from September of 1996. And I first had to decipher what that bandwidth, my usage actually meant, because I could not correlate it to anything today. But I was spending $7,000 US on monthly bandwidth bill. Today, I'm probably using 500 times more bandwidth, and it's basically free.
Yeah,
I remember launching a new venture in the late 1990s, around the 2000 mark, where we had to purchase Oracle licenses for $32,000 US per instance. Uh, those are free today, not the Oracle licenses, but the open source equivalent of what we had. So, what you've had a trend in the technology sector that's still ongoing, maybe even accelerating, of demonetization, decentralization, and as a result, democratization. Obviously, as things become cheaper, the adoption rate becomes more significant. More and more people join the game because they can actually afford it. Uh, it gets decentralized because you don't have to rely on a central power anymore. The old adage has always been, the startup was started in a garage. Today, it's probably started no longer in a garage, but in a corner of your bedroom,
or a
uh,
coffee shop. Yeah,
in a coffee shop, in a co-working space, wherever that may be. And ultimately, democratization. Both you and I remember the times where the great startups were launched in the U.S. in places like your home country, Israel. Some of them in Europe to a lesser extent already. And today, it's no longer the case. One of the core things that made me move to the U.S. in 1993, 1994 was the lack of local calling plans, flat fee local calling plans. In the time where to get online, you had to use dial-up internet. And that was costing me a fortune in France because I was being metered by the minute to dial up and first listen to what we called back then the national hymn, which we all listen
Yeah.
to 500 times a day because the connection broke and it cost a fortune. And like every new technology, initially it's extremely expensive. Nobody uses it, nobody can afford it. Then it gets less costly, performance improves, more people use it. Eventually it trends down to free in terms of pricing, and everybody is using it. So if you go back 60, 70 years, a poor person had no AC, a poor person was starving and hence skinny. Today, a poor person, depending on how you define him, depending what the country is, obviously I'm aware of that. But if you take a look at a developed country like the US, a poor person is more likely to be obese, has AC freely available, freely in brackets, has access to a fridge, has access to education, at least online, the equivalent of a Harvard, MIT education. None of that existed, and we've kind of like lost, we've lost control over what that actually meant to be poor, to be uneducated, et cetera, et cetera. All I'm saying is that today the opportunities are boundless as a result of technology becoming rapidly demonetized and democratized. Everybody has access to education, maybe not the actual physical degree, but I'm not sure too many employers care about that. And startups, people who want to launch their own business, certainly don't. And it's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to start a business.
It is. And I think one of the greatest challenges now is that because there's so much opportunity, it's hard to decide on what to focus on and how to find something that actually works. It's fairly easy to start. You have a lot of tools that are just free to get started with. You have a lot of education for free, but it's hard to find a niche that works and something that can really differentiate you. So, is there a framework that you use when you start new businesses? Because you've started a lot.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I couldn't agree with you more. But let's think about a little bit about human psychology. If everything is free or close to free and is being handed to you, it automatically loses value.
Right.
Right? There's a million experiments that have been done. If you offer something of value to someone for free, the person on the receiving end will look at it as quote unquote free and with little tangible value. To your point about a lot of businesses being created today, they're not being created because they actually resolve a problem. I think that's where the primary framework should be. Don't invent problems that don't exist and build a business around it. There's plenty of problems that still exist today that you can build a business around. And as a result of these tools becoming cheaper and cheaper, and anybody being able to launch for close to free, a lot of businesses get started that never should get started in the first place. Right? That is my belief. I think we see it all the time. That's also where you see a sky-high failure rate in startups, right? Aside from all of the other problems that a startup may encounter, lack of funding, lack of interest, no MVP, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, no MVP, I think, still remains the core, unless you're addressing with your product or service a problem that people encounter, number one, and that people encounter and are willing to pay to get rid of it. You don't have a business model. So the right framework, what should it be? Look, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you what's worked for me, and it may be working. It may be working for you. Rather than jumping headfirst into a business and saying, look, we're going to be resolving this problem at scale, try to do it on a very, very tiny, very, very small scale at first. It's a lot cheaper. You immediately get validation or rejection, right? Can you solve whatever the problem is? It could be global warming, climate change. Well, can you solve it in your neighborhood first? Can you do something that actually has a net positive impact in your neighborhood? Can you add value, number two? And if yes, to number one and number two, are people willing to pay for that incremental value that your product or service will provide to them? And last but not least, is this going to be economically sustainable? Which goes back to some business basics. Is it profitable enough? Am I going to be able to generate enough profit to pay for my costs and then some? If the answers to these 4 questions are no, you're probably going to fail. And chances are that people, investors that you're looking to get secure funding from, have been there and done that, and will, for some of them, will just, if they're from New York, they're going to tell you, hell no. You're going to be very direct. If they're from the West Coast in the US, they're going to dance around the topic and say, maybe another time, I'm too busy right now, whatnot. But that's like back in the days before the internet existed, when people were telling you, send me a fax when you were pitching them on something, which meant, translated into French, I have zero interest in what you're pitching me. Right. So
Yeah.
You always go back also to this equation between IQ and EQ. I think that IQ is anywhere between overrated and sometimes vastly overrated.
Mm-hmm.
And EQ on the other side is often underrated and sometimes vastly underrated. What I mean by that is that I'd rather have an idea that's a good idea versus an excellent idea with tremendous execution. And the tremendous execution always, unequivocally, requires very, very high EQ.
So your E is execution or your E is emotion?
I think in order to be an excellent on the execution side, you have to have strong emotion. You have to have strong involvement. You have to have extreme resilience, because you're going to be failing so many times. You're going to have so many setbacks from which you have to recover.
Yeah.
And unless you have that, unless you have thick skin or the ability to build thick skin, we're not born with it. We're all born pretty much the same way, where our moms are just like doing everything to protect us from anything, any kind of disease holding us. Oh, the wind is blowing too hard. Okay, turn down the AC, the baby's going to get the sniffles, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
That's not resilience. So once we cross that stage, the babysitting stage, and we're left on our own account, we have to build that resilience against the elements, right? At some point in time, you're old enough, whether that's at age 5 or at age 15, to go out by yourself. You're going to take off your training wheels off your bicycle. Well, if you take off the training wheels and you fall and you bleed a little bit on your knee, and you decide to never get on the bike because you're afraid to get hurt, you don't have the makeup for an entrepreneur. You're never going to make it as an entrepreneur. But if you just say, heck, I'm going to do whatever I can right now. It hurt, but I'm going to go back. I may fall 1 or 2 more times, maybe 10 more times, but eventually I'm going to drive without falling. There's something there. But you're building that resilience as you go, as you fail, as you get back up, as you continue to push forward.
Yeah, I think all these things are they're almost built into whatever you're building, or whenever you're aspiring to do something which is beyond average. You just have to expect a lot of pushback. And if there's no pushback, you're probably going in the wrong direction.
I think certainly, I'm not saying that you cannot have an average business. There are plenty of average businesses that are sustainable, meaning, I go shop at average businesses every day, some of which have been around for 50 or 100 years, especially in my neck of the woods in northeastern France. In Germany, you have a lot of average or average plus businesses that have been around for 300 years. Germany is known for that, right? Which also has a downside, right? So if you're looking, for example, one of the big things with my German friends, I have some German friends in the AI space, is like, oh my God, we're falling so far behind because of the lack of initiative that's being taken. The government doesn't take any initiative in the space. The entrepreneurs are afraid or holding back. They're okay with the status quo, right? There's nothing wrong with having an average business and making your living for yourself, for your friends, for your family, for your stakeholders. But you cannot build an extraordinary business by remaining ordinary, by definition. Sounds stupid, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
If you have a moonshot business idea and you don't want to be average, you have to do things differently, right? The old saying in the US, especially in the PR space and the communication space, is that a dog bites man is not news, but man bites dog is news. So you need to be in that case, in that scenario, you need to be the man that bites the dog to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah. Okay. I think this brings us to a topic that you spend a lot of your life and also your current venture on, which is how to promote yourself and how to market yourself when you're just getting started and you don't have maybe a budget for paying for ads. Um, how do you stand out?
It's the $1 million question. Today is probably the $1 billion question. How do you stand out, right? Rule number one to stand out is be different. We all have different personalities. Let them come out. So rule number one. Rule number two, while being different, be authentic. And that's the biggest challenge. Because what a lot of people in businesses do is they arbitrarily, in a non-organic way, try to make a stance and be different, but it's not them. They're putting on an act.
Hmm.
And as a result of putting on an act, they lose their core. They lose their core belief. They lose their core persona. So what you should do instead is figure out what truly makes you different, right? In my case, what makes me different is I grew up with 5, 6 different languages, right? Because the sheer nature of where I'm living within a 150-mile radius, there are 6 different countries, and they all speak different languages. So you have no choice, right? So you're immersed in this field, but that that can become a competitive advantage. That you can basically discern yourself from the general crowd. Some people have red hair. Turn that to your advantage. I know a local politician that does that very well and makes fun of himself. Bono has his glasses on by design. That's his brand. Everybody recognizes him. Everybody would probably recognize an avatar of Elton John if they saw it. Okay, that didn't happen by accident. That's all by design.
Yeah.
What a big difference, a big mistake that I see a lot of early stage startups do is advertise in the old sense of the word, meaning paying for attention way too early before they've actually defined that persona. It's a loser's game. You're going to be blowing money or investors' money, your money or investors' money. In either scenario, it's no good. Okay. Before you actually know who you are, and before you know who you are, you don't know what you can and what you should accomplish. So first, you should drill down to the very lowest common denominator, trying to figure out, who am I? What do I want to accomplish in life? And how am I going to get there as a person, first and foremost, as an organization with its stakeholders, with its employees, with its investors, second, and making sure everything is 100% authentic, everything is 100% aligned.
And what do you think about creating content for early companies or
So
for early startups?
I think content is the expression of what we just discussed.
Okay.
Because what you're seeing on the content side, the mistakes that you're seeing on the content side are almost identical to the mistakes that you're seeing when someone wants to be someone other than themselves. They want to create content for the sake of creating content. As a result, that content will never resonate because that content has to describe your persona. That content has to be as authentic as you are. I give you one example to illustrate what I'm saying. In the early 90s, as I told you, I moved from France to Southern California, Los Angeles in particular. Los Angeles, obviously known as Hollywood, more so back then than today, because obviously the industry, thanks to the Netflixes and the Prime Videos of the world, is much more sporadic today. We go to the restaurant, the waiter comes, and nice guy, engaging, smiley, tries to do a little bit of comedy and whatnot, as they quite often do in Los Angeles. So I finally get my meal. And he asked me, what do you do? So I telling him about my business, digital marketing business, and it's respectful. You ask him, what do you do? He says, I'm an actor. And I was brass tacks, half French, half German. I'm looking at the guy, you're an actor, then what are you doing here as a server? Shouldn't you be acting? But he was so shocked and so offended by what I said I didn't mean any harm. For me, it was just brass tacks, right? I mean, if that's your trade, why aren't you exercising your trade? Only later did I realize, right? But again, he was putting on an act. He was maybe being himself or thinking that he was acting while engaging or while making the buck, which, hats down, right? And congratulations. But that's some of the dissonance that you get with a lot of people, in particular with content. So when you're creating content, first thing that comes to mind when I say content for a lot of people that are a little bit older is blog, social media, and then LinkedIn, Facebook, right? Because that's how they relate to content. But there is no guiding theme. There's no glue to any and all of it. They just believe that somehow they have to create a lot of content to get attention. And in fact, what they're doing is they're diluting the value of their brand, of their persona, whether that's if you're an influencer, it's you yourself, right? A stand-up comedian is not going to market himself the same way as a Fortune 500 company or even as a startup. But at the end of the day, you have to drill down as to what makes you unique, what makes you authentic. And then when it comes to creating content, create content that resonates with that difference, with that authenticity. Otherwise, you're going to fail.
And do you think startups should they consult with experts on that? Should they spend? Because early stage startups, they consult about fundraising, they consult about product market fit, a lot of things. Should they spend as much energy on learning to promote themselves and their startup and creating content that will give them their first traction?
Look, if you probably took, let's say, LinkedIn, and if you use a scraping tool on LinkedIn and you type in expert, you're probably going to get 200 million matches because everybody believes they're an expert, number one. Number two, keep in mind, they're basically tooting their own horn. When you're writing your LinkedIn profile, you're writing it. So if you're calling yourself an expert in anything, in my book, you're not an expert, right? I know a lot of things about a lot of stuff, but I would never call myself an expert in any field. The expert on you is you. Nobody will know you as well as you do. Again, it sounds stupid, but think about that. Take a step back, right? So you are your own expert. I would go as far as say I'm an expert on myself, but on nothing else. Okay, so take that to your advantage. You don't have to spend any money. You don't have to consult anybody else. Maybe your close family, because they may be able to give you a different perspective. If you want to be a stand-up comedian and people think you're funny, ask your friends, ask your family, what does make me funny? What are the things that I've said that were funny to you and to everybody else? And then think this way, how can I leverage this? If you're building a product or service, use your immediate vicinity, not the people that pat you in the back. But if you're building a product or service that solves a problem, ask the people, ideally someone you don't know, how did this solve your problem? And what benefit did you get out of it? Start, again, with the lowest common denominator, one person, one business, et cetera, and then go to 3, 5, 10, et cetera. What a lot of startuppers want to do, they want to go to 1 million immediately. And it doesn't work that way. Even if you do have 1 million, you have 1 million different use cases one at a time.
Okay, Dom, I think this was really a very interesting conversation, and we touched on a lot of points. Before we go, I want if you can give us 5 tips for startup founders for our audience.
Tip number 1, I would say, I'm not sure if I arbitrarily can come up with 5, but number 1, I would say, listen to your inner voice. Very often, your inner voice, meaning your gut, is right. I cannot tell you how many times in my career, which is now 32 years that I've been in this space, and hopefully going for another 50 or so, how many times in retrospect I've told myself, if only I had listened to my gut. We're all wired a certain way, and that's why EQ and IQ, we're obviously always have that discussion. I think your EQ, your emotion, is much better at discerning right from wrong than your IQ. Why? Because your IQ, your mind is always trying to justify whatever you've done one way or another, right? You're always seeking to validate the reason why you think this is bad or why this is good, why you should be doing something, why not doing. And you're not listening enough to your gut. And over the last 250,000 years, we've evolved to make our gut a very good barometer when it comes to right or wrong, whether you're on the right track, whether you're on the wrong track. So I think that is vastly underutilized, and we all have this gut that we can rely on. Number two, always start small. The bigger you start, the larger the risk, the larger capital requirement, and the larger and more costly the failure. And I don't know anyone or very few people that have succeeded the very first time. So if you blow your wad at the first shot and you make a mistake and you have to go back to the drawing board, raise more capital, you know how difficult it was raising the capital the first time around. Imagine the second time after you failed. Okay?
Yeah.
So again, I'm not saying don't fail. Fail as small as possible. Try little things first because you want to fail as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. Number three, don't hesitate to throw in the towel when you're realizing you're going nowhere. A lot of startuppers, especially the ones with high EQ this time around, not IQ. The IQ guy has a tendency of throwing in the towel earlier, maybe too early. The EQ guy is going, I'm going to do this thick or thin, et cetera, et cetera. Well, take a step back, again, listen to your gut and also use your brain and say, am I just compounding this problem? Am I just setting myself up for a bigger failure? Should I not pivot? Should I not do something else? Should I not stop this altogether to stop the bleed? Because if you're going down the wrong track and you're scaling at the same time, scaling bad behaviors, scaling failure is certainly not recommended. Everybody would agree.
Yeah.
Number four, I'd say, and this is a mistake that I made for many years. I was working myself into the ground 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. Still, to a certain extent, I do. A little bit older, 54 now. At 7:30 p.m., everything is turned off. I don't have a phone in my bedroom anymore. I do something completely different. I either play a game, I read, I may watch a Netflix series. Don't listen to the people that tell you, that's bad for you. Your brain needs a break from what you're doing every single day. And then I'm doing something for the last year and a half. I'm walking at least 15,000 steps every morning. I get up very early, right? 5:15 or so in the morning. And I have my headset on, not this one, the other one. And I'm listening to 2 hours of podcasts while I'm walking every single morning. That's made a dramatic impact on my life. I'm listening to podcasts about a variety of subject matter, business related, non-business. Yes, at least probably 45 minutes to an hour of AI every morning. I guess in our space, you kind of have to right now, but also about health, spirituality. I vary the languages if you're a multilingual speaker. That way you keep your skills sharp, So I listen to my podcasts in French, German, English, Spanish, a little bit of Vietnamese. My wife is Vietnamese. Alsatian, which is our local language here. They do exist, the podcasts. And yeah, that's about it. Don't believe much in work-life balance because if you're an entrepreneur or startupper, by definition, you're not a work-life balance guy. Come on, right? You're building something that you think is going to be dramatically improving the lives of a lot of people on this planet. How can you be normal? We're the crazies. By definition, we're the crazies. So don't let people, and if you feel comfortable doing it, why change, right? So people are talking to me, for example, I'm not even 55 years old. So, when are you going to retire? I'm like, what a misnomer. Retiring. By definition, retiring means to step away from something. Why would I step away from something I love doing? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. I hope I'll never retire. But again, I'm part of the crazies.
Did we get 5?
4.5, I think. It's the last
Okay.
one.
Okay. All good. Thanks a lot, Dom. Who should reach out to you and where should people find you?
The easiest way is kind of like how we originally connected. It's on LinkedIn. I believe I'm the only Dom Einhorn. It's not Don, it's Dom as in Mary, Einhorn,
Yeah.
Einhorn. From there, I mean, obviously, I'm running Masters of Trivia, which is my lifelong passion. So, going back to doing what you love, turning questions, quizzes into an actual business model. That's been a driving force behind what we do. Everybody likes to play games. In our case, they're intelligent games that are meant to engage large user bases on very, very granular topics, while at the same time resolving a huge problem for the advertiser, who's always trying to reach the most targeted person ever. And nothing allows them to do better than quizzes, because you can create quizzes on any topic in any language under the sun.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, Before we go, whoever's made it so far, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this. And if you haven't done so yet, come to Meet.Capital, subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll get awesome content about startups, like a summary of Dom's tips for startups, which you'll get in a few weeks. So
I agree. I'm subscribed to.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Bye, Dom. This was great.